Hi, my name is Michael Gower. I'm an accessibility consultant with IBM. This presentation will assist you, as briefly as possible, in making your applications more accessible with one simple change of habit. This is the first of a number of short, practical videos on accessibility I'm creating to allow you to quickly improve the chances of making accessible applications. To save time, this presentation has been stripped of almost all background information. If you require more argument and rationale for why you need to be thinking about accessibility, please see the links on the last slide. I'm assuming that if you are reviewing this presentation, you are aware that accessibility is a requirement on any product IBM creates, internally or for consumption. Even for client projects, odds are that regulatory or legal requirements exist to be accessible, whether the client rep realizes it or not. I'm also assuming that you like being proactive at doing a good job, and finally, that like me, you are very busy and just want the information you need. For anyone who has worked on a project where accessibility was an identified requirement, you know that it adds effort. You also know that it is hard to get the correct information on what you need to do. More often than not, there is an initial lack of awareness about accessibility, both by the client and development team, which means it gets added on partway through the lifecycle. This increases risk of failure, but there's also risk if accessibility is not addressed, so you're likely to encounter it on most projects going forward. But if no one is asking for you to do accessibility at this moment, what can you proactively do now to reduce your time burden later when someone actually makes a requirement? IBM is working at new automated tools, techniques, and guidelines to improve accessibility. You will encounter these more precise strictures on most projects. However, developers can realize much of the benefit of accessibility by introducing one simple step to existing routines. I call it the 80% solution, with less than 20% of the effort. When you are unit testing a component or widget, before you check in your code, put your mouse aside and make sure you can operate it with a keyboard. If you are doing functional testing, make sure you can interact with all components on the web page with a keyboard. That's it. Just do a keyboard-only check of the code. If you find standard keys work with your widgets, odds are things will be much more accessible as the entire application is built, and you can have some level of comfort. In situations where you find the keyboard alone can't perform actions, you are remediating a much smaller issue before it becomes endemic. And where you find the platform itself is preventing you from making keyboard operable components, you have a chance to flag this risk much earlier in the project lifecycle. So you don't need to install new tools, you don't need to research a bunch of new standards, you just need to use your keyboard. It's simple and quick. So what are the benefits of doing this? First, if you are a blind user or have several other disabilities, you don't use a mouse, you use a keyboard. So right away, by making the application keyboard-driven, developers increase the likelihood it will be operable. Operable is one of 4 principles set out in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from the World Wide Web Consortium. Keyboard operation also addresses to some degree 2 of the other 3 principles. As part of functional verification testing, you will be confirming the components on the page indicate when they receive focus. This makes the page more perceivable. I cover concepts like focus rectangles in my web demonstration in a few slides. There's more to ensuring a robust app than using a keyboard, but it is the first step towards interoperability, which drives the robust principle. If you can't use a keyboard, the app is certainly not going to be robust. For folks who are not keyboard users or power keyboard users, a great deal of testing, particularly in unit and functional verification testing, can be performed with just 9 keystrokes or combinations. Almost all the standard HTML and OS components can be operated with them. There are other combinations to learn for less common components, but this list is a great starting point. For widgets and more complex components, there is an expansive list of keyboard interaction on the Accessible Rich Internet Application Authoring Practices page. Testers can use the same technique to do a simple accessibility check with an existing set of scripts. It adds on little overhead and you don't need to create a new script. I've created a very simple test area where users can see some examples for themselves. This is just basic web components. There's nothing fancy on here, no customized components, but I discuss focus order and focus rectangles and just basic keyboard interoption among some basic web forms. In the few years since I began advocating this approach, the smartphone and tablet markets have emerged. I have developers ask me, if I'm making an iPhone app, why would I care about keyboard interaction? First, most applications continue to have requirements to support multiple platforms, including desktop, so the keyboard requirement doesn't often go away entirely. As well, if something can be operated by standard keyboard methods, then its structure is more likely to be correct, and therefore able to work predictably with other technologies. Finally, IBM's tactical approach is to use the browser for app work, with PhoneGap providing integration with underlying technology, not the native OS. So testing with a keyboard continues to be a requirement. I'll also mention that Apple has its own clear guidelines for accessibility for iPhone and iPad apps, and some persons with disabilities using these devices do in fact use a keyboard to operate them. So doing these keyboard checks alone is not going to guarantee you're making accessible code. Recalling the 4 principles of accessibility from a few slides back, one of those, making your application understandable, is not really addressed by this tactic at all. There are a number of other considerations, from using automated tools to following guidelines and techniques in the IBM Accessibility Checklist. As you become more aware of accessibility, you will get a chance to broaden your understanding of how to improve your work. However, especially on projects where accessibility is identified late in the game as a requirement, you will have saved yourself significant pain by adopting this tactic at the start as part of your basic development practice. Here are the 2 best starting points for more information. The Human Ability and Accessibility Center site is large and complete. Use the links in the left navigation to find information more appropriate. I mentioned ARIA earlier. The second link contains details on specific keyboard interaction with any number of components. Finally, feel free to contact me personally if you have any questions. I can either help or direct you to someone else. Thanks for taking the time to review this.